All right, ladies and gentlemen, it does appear that the number 2, I'm not really sure if he deserves that title anymore, considering that he got knocked out in the first round and picked 2 Spectral characters against a Spectral boss in the tournament. But the number 2 Kurobot is back at it again, Mr. Glaive Kyo. And what he's here to talk about is the truth about every Genshin Killer game. And the title Genshin Killer has been anointed for many different titles. We had the original, one of the OGs, Tower of Fantasy, and of course many other open world games that have come out or are supposed to come out in the near future. We have games like Wuwa, we've got the Anantas, we've got the NTEs, yeah, totally, and of course Azure Premilia. And so I'm assuming that this is what that topic is going to be. Some of the existing titles like Wuwa, we clearly see Brant over here, and some of the upcoming ones. And so let's see what this man has to share.
Have you ever thought to yourself, why is it that every single time a new gacha game comes out, people immediately call it the Genshin Killer? And why does it send people into an absolute meltdown?
The reason why people call it the Genshin Killer, at least in my opinion, is because there are so many individuals that are upset with where Genshin Impact is. They're upset by the fact that there's not a lot of updates being made to the game. They're upset by the fact, right, that quality of life, something that should be celebrated, something that should be heavily advertised to people. The quality of life that Genshin oftentimes comes out with is basic shit like being able to track quest NPCs, being able to track bosses, batch buying items, and being able to search your mailbox. I think people are generally upset with Genshin because this is the quality of life that they're openly advertising to all of these, players, putting it in all of these announcements, making big ass Twitter posts with a huge header about it. And those are the types of changes that are being made instead of actual things, right? Like weekly boss mats, talent ascension materials being locked to certain days of the week. The fact that those devs are never addressing those and going for all of these small fish fry items that should have been in the game on release, I think that's why people are talking about Genshin Killers so much, because they are simply pissed off with these devs and they are pissed off with where the trajectory of the game is. Because why won't they just do the big ticket items that will objectively make the game better instead of all of these things that, frankly, no one really gives a shit about?
Seriously, you would think that someone just insulted their mother. In reality, they're just probably watching a Glaive Kyo video. The second and
Yeah, I would have clicked off the vid. After that one.
new gacha game gets the Genshin Killer label, the usual suspects come crawling out of the woodwork. Twitter threads, unhinged YouTube rants, Reddit essays longer than a Google Doc of a smelly rap. The complaints? It is just clickbait. No game will ever kill my Genshin Impact. Stop comparing them, just enjoy both. As if the entire gaming industry isn't built on competition. But here's the reality. As much as people pretend to hate the term, they can't stop talking about it. The outrage, the debates, the thousands of reaction videos, that is exactly why it works. The people who pretend to be above it can't help themselves. Like, I'm so tired of this drama. Proceeds to watch every single 20-minute video talking about it. Like, buddy, you are the drama. But here's the thing. This so-called annoying label isn't just marketing gimmick. It actually forces the genre to improve. When a new game gets slapped with a Genshin Killer title, it is thrown into a high-stakes battle it never even signed up for.
I would say they did sign up for it. I would say Wuthering Waves 1,000,000% signed up for the title of Genshin Killer because in essence, a lot of what makes up Wuwa is taking the baseline systems of Genshin, the exploration, boss fights, combat, that sort of stuff, and putting a spin on it that in a lot of ways is simply better than what was there before. Things like ascension materials requiring much less to level up the characters, better tracking, all of these things, right, that take features that are maybe having a lot of friction in Genshin Impact, taking things like combat where it could be a little bit more boring or less engaging, and then essentially improving on those and then poaching the player base and bringing them over. And I do think that Wuthering Waves, especially in 2.0, has been so good at that objective that Genshin Impact now has to start catching up. They've been catching up. Like I mentioned before, there's been more quality of life updates done for Genshin in the past year that Wuwa, or close to a year, that Wuwa has been released. More QOL in Genshin than there has ever been in the entire lifetime of the game. And you cannot chalk that up to coincidence. It is 1 1,000,000%, just my opinion though, it is 1,000,000% attributable to Wuwa's success. Because believe me, if Wuwa had actually EOS'd, had actually, gone into irrelevancy, wasn't able to grow its player base, 2.0 bombed, Genshin would probably be taking their foot off the gas pedal. And so, you could view all of this hype around the Genshin Killer, right, that moniker, as an actual opportunity for Genshin to become better. The more Genshin Killers there are, and the better they do, that results in Genshin Impact itself inherently becoming a better game, because they now have to actually improve their features that they have been refusing to for the past few years, because now there's actual real competition that players will go to instead if they keep getting ignored.
With the Genshin Killer title, it is thrown into a high-stakes battle it never even signed up for. No trial period, no warm-up, just straight into the deep end. And suddenly, the expectations are sky high. If we're talking about a regular gacha game, it can probably get away with just being okay. A Genshin Killer, it has to prove itself at a very high level.
True. And those expectations, again, are set there because even the Genshin player base is expecting stuff. I'm pretty sure there's a sizable portion of players across Hoyoverse that are excited when these new titles come out, because they know that means that their game under the Hoyo umbrella that they enjoy is going to start getting better as well. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the player base that have those exact thoughts.
Prove itself at a very high level. It's not enough to just have pretty waifus and flashy combat. At this point, almost every gacha game has that. It has to do better. Whether that's fairer monetization, deeper gameplay, or an actual endgame that isn't just collecting primo gems like Johnny Somali collecting jail time. And guess what? That pressure works. Because now, new gacha games can't just copy-paste the same formula and expect people to eat it up. They have to innovate or get laughed off the stage like how they did to Tower of Fantasy. Meanwhile, the top dogs like, oh, I don't know, a certain multi-billion-dollar game actually have to try instead of coasting on fan loyalty. You think Genshin suddenly introducing a new endgame mode was just coincidence? The 5-star selector, the weapon banner tweak? No! That is what happens when a new game enters the ring and people start asking questions. Calling something a big gacha game killer isn't about predicting a game's demise. It is about making sure no one gets too comfortable. And if your favorite game needs to be protected from competition, maybe it's not as untouchable as you think.
And I think this is probably 1000% the most dangerous part about a game this big with this dedicated of a community, is all of those people who can't seem to recognize what competition actually does for their game, and honestly don't even know how much budget compared to the money that Hoyo is making is actually going into development. There is so much expenditure for Hoyo games like ZZZ, HSR, and Genshin. So much expenditure on things like marketing, their nuclear power plants, the fucking orchestral shows, the pop-up events, all of that stuff. None of that is actually going into the development of the game. It's going into the development of the community and the player base and the marketing. And the thing is, them making less money, them having competition, them seeing a drop in revenue is genuinely something that is going to make all of their games better, because that puts a fire under the devs. It makes them recognize and realize, holy shit, maybe we should start putting more budget into the actual development of the game and stop advertising a product that is inferior to other games. And the thing is, guys, the thing is, we have a track record of that phenomenon happening. We have a track record of Hoyo diverting resources away and back into their games because they're not doing well. And those examples are ZZZ with version 1.4 and the disaster it had with TVs, and HSR 3.0, the absolute disaster of a story, of animations, of, just like playtime when it came to that patch. And they've committed to actually making updates to fix those games and make them better. But the only way that that commitment occurs, the only way that the devs are able to make those promises, and in ZZZ's case, deliver on those promises, is for the game to perform worse revenue-wise and player count-wise. That is the only thing that motivates these Hoyo devs. Maybe not even the Hoyo devs, that motivates Hoyo leadership. Otherwise, all that money is going to be spent in basically anything else except the actual game development. And it's a real shame. It's a real shame, because you're going to have other developers, and I'm going to be looking at the other side of the equation. I'm going to be looking at the other Genshin Killer. You have other developers like Kuro Games, where 2.0 is an absolute stellar patch. Amazing, amazing revenues. The CEO sullenly confirms that 2.0 was their most profitable patch yet and had the highest day one sales of any patch they've ever had. And then they proceed to add even more quality of life in 2.1. They proceed to add echo loadouts in 2.1 after having their most successful patch. Look at ZZZ as the other example. 1.4 was one of their most successful patches with Miyabi. And then they proceed to take their foot entirely off the gas pedal in version 1.5 and release a complete filler patch with events that are needlessly long, have a ton of playtime, way too much dialogue bloat, and then they have problems like that occur right after their bombshell patch. The Wuwa devs, Kuro Games, they do a crazy good patch, and then they continue on adding more quality of life. They keep making the game better. But when it comes to the Hoyo games, they do a great patch, and then they just recede. They start looking like Tectone's hairline in terms of the commitment that they actually have to making the game better. And it sometimes is really, really, really unfortunate.
Let's not pretend that the Genshin Killer label just appeared out of thin air. Tectone practically invented it. And if you spend any time in the gacha community, you've seen Tectone sling that term around like it's a hawk to a coin rug pull scam. Love him or hate him, the guy has a knack for riling people up and keeping the chatter alive. Every time a new gacha drops, you can bet he's already got a video up asking if it's the one.
This is the guy that tells me that my thumbnails are bad, that my thumbnails and titles are bad. Come on, man.
When you point one finger at somebody, there's three pointed back at you, amigo.
And whether you agree to his takes or think he's just farming engagement, you can't deny that he shaped the people talk about these games. What he's really doing isn't just stirring the pot, it's keeping the conversation alive. By throwing bold claims into the mix, he forces people to actually look at these games, compare them, and figure out what works and what doesn't. It's not about predicting Genshin's downfall, it's about making sure that new releases don't get ignored. Some might call it pure clickbait, but in today's digital age, that is just smart content creation.
True. And this is the thing. The Genshin devs actually do start taking inspiration from other games. We talked about things, right? Like the new endgame. We talked about things like the free 5-star selector just randomly occurring on that land's release. I would say a lot of those were motivated by these actions that were taken by the Genshin Killers, like Wuwa. And even these updates, right? The weak-ass quality of life of tracking bosses and being able to locate quest NPCs in the quest menu. These are kind of things that, let's be honest here, Wuwa did as well. And so you could say, oh, this isn't Genshin copying Wuwa. This is Genshin being entirely original with features that just happen to be in Wuwa first. But most people are going to view it as Genshin is taking inspiration from Wuthering Waves when making these updates. That's probably the more realistic viewpoint to have.
Tectone's dramatic takes might seem excessive, but without them, half of these games wouldn't even make it into people's radar. So here's the Tectone, provoking controversy, driving conversation, and ensuring that every new release is at least given a fair shot in the arena. You know what else thrives on competition? Content creation. Unlike billion-dollar game studios, independent creators like me rely on actual community support. Now, speaking of things that keep this genre alive, let's get back to why competition is the best thing that could happen to gacha. People love to act like comparing games is some kind of a war crime. Stop pitting games against each other. Like, okay, but how else are we supposed to figure out which ones are actually worth playing? Comparisons aren't just for drama. Although, let's be honest, they do fuel some absolutely hilarious Mr. Pokey tweets.
So this is my viewpoint on comparisons. And this has always been my viewpoint on comparisons. Comparisons, at least the ones that I make, are done for the explicit purpose of highlighting where one party or one game is doing something exceptionally well and where another party or another game is not doing something particularly well. And so creating this movement, right? Creating this notion in people's minds that they should be seeing what somebody else is doing better or some other game is doing better and want the same exact thing for their game. And through that, drive some level of feedback, some type of communication, and some change so that they can take those good things that are in another game and eventually get them applied to their own. And if you never make the comparisons, you never bring that up, you try to outlaw it, you label it as drama bait, or you just label it as drama as a whole and invalidate the basis of a comparison completely, then your game will never actually get better. Because first, for something to get better, you have to recognize why it is not that good or where the problems are. If you think that something is always consistently perfect, you're never going to find a reason to change it. And when developers, right, are doing things like exploration quality of life locked behind limited banners with characters that can cost up to $300 just to access features that should have been in the baseline game in the first place, and you lap it all up. You eat it all up and you don't think there's anything wrong with it. That's a problem. That is genuinely a problem, because now these devs or these leaders at Hoyo are trying to basically change the way that they're developing the game and entirely make it more unfriendly for players. And you want to have comparisons to other titles so that you can see that you are actually getting fucked. And it's not good. And people and players should be aware of how bad it is actually getting for them so that their game doesn't get progressively worse. Because I am like many people. I am like many players that used to love Genshin Impact, that used to love Honkai Star Rail, that wants to love ZZZ. But there are just things, there are just elements about those games, actions made by those developers, global passives added after saying that you were going to fix the game. There are just those elements that are continually dragging those games down. And until you start making those comparisons, right, start recognizing, wow, there are other games that are doing just fine and not fucking their players as hard as this, you should want that same level of just, I don't know, respect in your titles that you play the most as well.
Poke tweets, they are how players articulate what works and what doesn't. When someone says, this game is a Genshin killer, what they're really saying is, hey, this one does something better. Maybe it has a fairer gacha system, more rewarding content, or wild concept, an actual reason to log in beyond daily chores. And yes, and if you're wondering, yes, these debates can get messy. Reddit threads turn into a digital war zone, Discord servers implode, and suddenly you see your favorite streamer Saint Tontus ranting about a Vars 2 video, and
crazy, we actually had one pulled up. Like it's like you could see this at the start of the video. It was directly to the right of it.
Getting into a 1v9 in a gacha cast.
Why you gotta do me like that?
Sort of like runs where you're completing content, actually fishing eventually reward or one basically stuff where you're talking about and you're talking about and also after you're where something
I'm spitting, asshole.
But that chaos, that's how the genre evolves. If no one ever questioned the status quo, we would still be playing gacha games with 0.3% SSR rates, and content droughts that make Sumeru deserts from Genshin look like a tropical paradise. Every time people argue over whether a game is a killer, they're actually holding developers accountable. And if that makes some fanboys uncomfortable, well, maybe their favorite game should try a little bit harder. Look, whether you love or hate the Genshin Killer label, you can't deny one thing: it gets people talking. In an industry where attention is currency, that is everything. And let's be real, most gacha games launch and disappear faster than Lol Shinya promising daily Twitch streams.
Don't be an asshole. Don't be an asshole.
Without a strong marketing hook, they don't even get the chance to prove themselves before they're buried under whatever Hoyoverse is doing next. Calling something a big game killer forces people to pay attention. Even if they're just there to market, that is still engagement. And guess what? That engagement translates into actual players. People might check out a game just to see if it lines up with the hype, and before they know it, they're 40 polls deep into a banner, convincing themselves they totally don't have an addiction to gacha. Sure, the label is overhyped, but that's the point. If a game launches with zero discussion, it's already dead in the water. If calling it a Genshin killer gets it on people's radar, then guess what? It's just one. And you would think the term Genshin killer was some kind of a personal attack.
I wouldn't say it's directly a W. I would say that you end up in a situation where you can end up like Wuwa. I think Wuwa is a good example of the Genshin killer term. I think Tower of Fantasy lies on the other end of the spectrum, where that's like when you don't want to be called the Genshin killer. 1,000,000%. It's a double-edged sword. I wouldn't call it just a straight up W having that title, because holy shit. Having that title turned TOF into a game that had probably one of the biggest downfalls we've ever seen in the gacha space.
How some people react to it. Newsflash, competition isn't a death sentence. It's a wake-up call. The second a new game starts gaining traction under this label, it puts pressure on everyone. Not just the new devs trying to prove themselves, but also the reigning champs who suddenly realize they can't afford to slack off. And that includes Genshin. Because when another game starts doing something better, Hoyoverse actually has to respond. Even if the so-called killer doesn't live up to the hype, it still raises the bar. Maybe it introduces a better pity system, a more rewarding endgame, or heaven forbid, a battle pass that isn't just a glorified chore list.
And I think one thing that Genshin players don't realize is that anytime a game titled the Genshin player or the Genshin Killer releases, Hoyo adds a quality of life to their game. Little did you know, when TOF was getting ready to release, while Genshin was prepping for Sumeru, Genshin started adding a little bit more quality of life to the game. Obviously, TOF didn't pan out that well, and Genshin stopped adding the quality of life, but you should just view the Genshin Killer label as a sign that Hoyo is going to start fixing the game. And the more Genshin Killers there are in the space, the more quality of life Hoyo is going to add. And even if the game doesn't last long term like TOF did, hell, it still got quality of life added to Genshin. And so, in all honesty, every single Genshin player should be actively welcoming every single Genshin Killer with open arms, because they know, at a bare minimum, if that label does eventually get appended or added to the game, it's like kind of 100% guaranteed to result in some kind of improvement to Genshin as a whole. 1,000,000%. That's what will happen.
And once players see that, they start demanding more from every game they play. The gacha industry thrives on engagement, and engagement thrives on competition. Without it, we would still be stuck in an era where devs get away with laziness because who else are you gonna play? Every game that enters the ring, whether it wins or not, pushes the whole genre forward. And if Genshin fans were really so confident that nothing could top their favorite game, they wouldn't be so scared of the conversation in the first place. It doesn't matter if a game actually kills anything. What matters is that people care enough to argue about it. And in an industry built on FOMO and constant engagement, that is everything. People don't realize just how much outrage-fueled marketing works. You see a new game getting called a Genshin Killer, and suddenly EO makes a new tweet. YouTubers are making reaction videos on it, and streamers who swore they would never touch another gacha game are booting up just to roast it. And then a week later, some of them are hooked to it. Even if a game flops, the fact that it dominated the conversation for even a second means that it did something right. Hype alone can't sustain a bad game, but it can give a good game the visibility it needs to survive in a crowded market. If nobody is talking about a game, it might as well not exist. So yeah, the Genshin Killers.
Let's think about games that nobody ever talks about, so they functionally don't ever exist. Actually, we can't do that because nobody knows about them.
Their label is overused, but do you know what's worse? Irrelevance. At the end of the day, the real question isn't whether a game can actually kill Genshin, it is whether it can force the genre to evolve. And every time a new game gets that label, that is exactly what happens. It pushes developers to be better, it forces them to innovate instead of just recycling this.
Looks like editor made a bit of a fucking boo-boo, Glaive. There's no more music for the last fucking 30 seconds of the vid.
Same formulas. It puts pressure into existing games just to keep up instead of coasting on their success. And it makes sure players aren't just accepting whatever is thrown at them, but actively demanding more. So yeah, the term Genshin Killer is overused, exaggerated, and sometimes flat out ridiculous. But you know what? It works. It keeps people engaged. It keeps studios on their toes. And it keeps the gacha industry from becoming a complacent, lifeless cash grab. And if your favorite game really is that untouchable, then ask yourself why.
Okay, that was a bit of an interesting ending. But I gotta say, I think Glaive raised some very, very interesting and some very, very valid points throughout this entire discussion of what being a Genshin Killer actually means, what results from that, and at its core, how the term Genshin Killer leads to a general improvement in the gacha space. And I do think it's right. The more Genshin Killers you have, the better Genshin gets. And there's been proof of that in pretty much every quality of life update you can imagine for the game as it's gone through its 5-year lifespan. And so with that, I've given my take. Let me know what you think. Peace.